If you're interested in film photography, it probably won't have escaped your attention that film is quite expensive these days. But there again, so is everything else. And with that revelation, I think we can end the video now. Okay, I won't end it quite yet, but with that increase in cost there can be a temptation to look for cheaper alternatives, and one such alternative is using outdated film. There's nothing particularly new in this, but in some cases shooting outdated film has become cool and trendy, even to the point that some people are paying quite a bit of their hard-earned money for potentially useless film. From my own perspective, I'll only shoot outdated film if it's either free or very cheap, or it's part of a batch that's been tested and is known to perform relatively well. When I drifted into digital photography in the early noughties, there were rolls of film kicking around in various camera bags, mostly Fuji Superior 200 because that was my film of choice back then, but none of the film had been stored in a fridge or freezer, so it had been subjected to 20 years of whatever temperature the weather and central heating provided. I also rounded up more unused film from family members that had similarly been stored at room temperature for 20 years or so. I'll occasionally buy rolls at a flea market or whatever, but it has to be cheap. I wouldn't want to pay more than £1 for a roll of film that might or might not be any good. The other source of outdated film can be camera shops or film labs that have got hold of a batch of film, tested a few rolls to make sure it works, and give guidance as to the best ISO settings or development times for that particular stock. There's a general rumour or myth that you overexpose outdated film by one stop for every 10 years that it's out of date. And actually, if you haven't got anything else to work from, this isn't a bad starting point, but it's not guaranteed to give you perfect results. In an ideal situation, you'd have a batch of the same film stock, so you could sacrifice part of the first roll to take test shots at varying exposures, and then examine the negatives to determine the best ISO to shoot the remainder of the film at. Generally, faster films can deteriorate quicker than slow films, and colour film often goes off more than black and white. So if you've got a 20-year-old roll of 100 ISO black and white, it's likely to perform better than a 20-year-old roll of 400 ISO colour. All of this is a generalisation, and as with all generalisations, there will be exceptions. Anyway, now for some examples. I've shot a few rolls of my Fuji Superior 200, which expired in 2006, rating it at 50 ISO, in other words overexposing it by 2 stops, and it's performed quite well. Some shots are even looking quite punchy, but it does have a tendency to turn into a muddy brown mush in the darker areas. In fact, that's something I've noticed on all the significantly outdated film that I've shot. It tends to fall off a cliff as it enters the shadow areas, rather than gradually fading into shadow. If we look at the negatives, the film base is somewhat fogged compared to a fresh roll of film, albeit not exactly the same stock because they don't make Fuji Superior anymore, but overall the exposures look good enough. Compare that to a roll of Colour Plus that expired in 2009. The roll was stored in similar conditions to the Fuji Superior that we just looked at, and the negatives look almost monochromatic. It's hard to imagine any colour information coming out of this film, but there's definitely a bit of colour left, as you can see in these sample shots. It's nowhere near as punchy as it would have been if I'd used a fresh roll though. When a film is only a couple of years out of date, I shoot it as normal, without making any adjustments. This roll of FP4 never made it into the fridge. It sat in the camera that I never got round to shooting, before being swapped to another camera that then went wrong, finally getting used once I'd sorted the problem out. There's no noticeable degradation on this roll, it's just like any other roll of FP4. Not to be confused with FP4 Type 517 Cine film. This is an outdated film stock that a camera shop in the UK called Analog Cameras managed to get a whole load of. They tested it, produced suggested developing times, respooled it into 35mm canisters, and are selling it at a pretty reasonable price compared to regular FP4. The developing times are a bit long. I shoot mine at 100 ISO and develop it in Rodinal at a 1+25 concentration, and the developing time is 15.5 minutes, compared to 9 minutes for the standard stock. The film base looks more or less the same as standard FP4 Plus, and the shots come out great, which is all that really matters. But what about something much older? When I got hold of my Nikomat FTN, I also bought a bag of odds and ends, and in that bag was this roll of Kodak Plus-X Pan 125 ISO film, with an expiry date of March 1983. I knew this stuff came from a house clearance, and as the film was bundled with the other accessories, it's very unlikely to have been stored in a fridge. So would it be any good? I figured that as it was a relatively slow black and white film and should have a reasonably high silver content, that I'd just overexpose by 2 stops. Well, actually 2 and a bit, because I settled on 25 ISO. I planned to shoot it in my Rolleiflex SL35, but somehow that camera just sat in the to-do pile for over a year, until last week when I finally got down to stripping it apart. Once it was back together and all working, it was time to pop the roll of Plus-X in and head out to get some shots. So the big question is, did it work? And the answer is, yes it did. I got a full set of negatives, mostly exposed relatively well. The film base is somewhat foggy, and as before the detail fades rapidly in the shadow areas, but it's still a usable set of shots. So I'll show a few of the shots from that roll and then talk a little more about my findings. No matter what film I'm using, there's always that moment of anticipation when I open the developing tank as to whether there will be any shots at all, so I was particularly pleased to see images when I pulled this roll out. The film is very curly, maybe due to its age, but I've never had a film that's this curly, and it curls both ways, which didn't help when scanning it on my flatbed scanner. The film should lie flat in the holder, but the centre was curving significantly, so the focus of the scans won't be as good as it could be. I gave the film 7 minutes in the developer, which looks about right judging by the density of the film leader. I've got an even older roll of film in stock, this Ilford FP3 with an expiry date of December 1961. I'm less inclined to use this roll, partly because I've had some problems with 120 film even that's within its expiry date but hasn't been stored very well, so I doubt this roll would be particularly good. But more than that, I think it makes quite a nice ornament to go on the shelf with some old cameras. I'm sure that sooner or later a roll of expired film will turn round and bite me and I won't get any shots at all, but until that time I'll carry on shooting the odd roll every now and then. The funky and unpredictable results from old colour film, complete with weird colour shifts, can be quite pleasing at times, but you usually find yourself shooting at something like 50 or 25 ISO, so it's often best kept for those brighter days. I'll do another video sometime in the future looking at the Rolleiflex SL35, but as far as shooting a roll of film that expired 42 years ago, that will probably do. If you've enjoyed watching, please like the video and maybe even subscribe to the channel, not forgetting to click on the bell icon so you get notifications when future videos are released. That's it for now, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you in a future video.